Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, there's a specific feeling, I think we've all felt it, of pulling a book off a shelf that maybe your parents read, or maybe you just discovered it on a rainy Saturday afternoon when you were 10. It smells like old paper, and it feels safe. It feels permanent.
It feels like a pillar, like something solid.
Exactly, a pillar. It's holding something up in your mind. And today, we are talking about some of the biggest pillars in literature. We're talking about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, and specifically for today's deep dive, C.S. Lewis.
And the Chronicles of Narnia.
Right, the Chronicles of Narnia.
But we aren't just reminiscing about the wardrobe and the lamppost today. We're actually looking at a storm brewing on the horizon regarding the future of Narnia. And frankly, it's looking like a Category 5.
A very big storm. We are digging into the upcoming Netflix adaptation of The Chronicles of Narnia, which, as a lot of you probably know, is being directed by Greta Gerwig. And our map for this deep dive, our primary source, is a breakdown from fantasy author and commentator John Delarose.
Right. And to set the stage, Delarose is not coming at this from a neutral wait-and-see perspective. Not at all.
No.
He is sounding the alarm. He's looking at interviews with the film's editor. He's looking at comments from IMAX CEOs, production rumors, and he is building a case that this production might be fundamentally misunderstanding or, maybe even intentionally ignoring what makes Narnia Narnia.
He uses some pretty strong language. I mean, words like bastardization and slot merchants. So we're not dealing with a subtle critique here.
No, this is a clash of philosophy. On one side, you have the, quote, singular vision of modern Hollywood filmmakers who want to leave their own stamp on a property.
Sure, the auteur theory.
Exactly.
Yep.
And on the other side, you have the argument that these stories are, as the source puts it, perfect as they are and shouldn't be touched unless you were treating them as sacred scripture.
So the mission today is to unpack these specific claims. We aren't just going to be gossiping about casting, though we will get to that.
But
We're asking a bigger question. Is Hollywood reimagining the soul out of C.S. Lewis's work? And we're going to start with a revelation that, frankly, when I read it in the note, my jaw...
You're talking about the editor?
I am talking about the editor. Let's dive right into section 1, the editor's philosophy, or maybe lack thereof.
So the source highlights an interview with Andrew Weisblum. He is the reported editor for Greta Gerwig's Narnia film, and he appeared on a show called Art of the Cut.
Art of the Cut sounds very...
It is. It's an industry podcast where editors talk shop. And in this interview, Weisblum drops an absolute bombshell regarding his process. He essentially admits that he is not referring to the source material for the Narnia film.
Okay, let's just pause there. Let that breathe for a second.
Yep.
You are editing the movie adaptation of one of the most beloved book series in human history, and you aren't reading the book.
That is the claim. And what's wild is that it's not just laziness or, that he didn't have time. It's a deliberate philosophical choice.
Yeah.
In the transcript provided by the source, Weisblum explains his reasoning. He says, quote, "I'm choosing not to refer back to that material because we're going to do our own take on it."
Our own take? Wow. That phrase does a lot of heavy lifting.
It does.
It's like a chef saying, I'm making lasagna, but I'm not looking at a recipe because I want to do my own take. And then he serves you a bowl of cereal.
Well, his logic is a bit more nuanced than that, even if the result might feel the same to a fan. To explain why he thinks this is a good idea, he actually brings up a comparison case.
Okay.
He discusses another project he edited called Caught Stealing. It's based on a novel by Charlie Huston, and Weisblum says he didn't read that book either.
So it's a pattern. What's the logic? I mean, I'm genuinely trying to understand this. Usually you want to know the story you're telling.
His argument is all about audience accessibility. He says he decided that Caught Stealing wasn't being made exclusively for, and his words are, aficionados of the book. He wanted the story to be clear for people who love the book or people who don't.
Okay, I can sort of see the devil's advocate position there, maybe. If you know the book too well, maybe you assume the audience knows things that aren't actually on the screen. You fill in the blanks in your head.
Precisely. That is the methodology of ignorance, if we want to call it that.
A bold name for it.
Well, it fits. Weisblum explicitly states that he wants to keep his objectivity. He wants to avoid, and this is a key quote, subconsciously relying on information I had from the book that maybe wasn't being conveyed in the movie.
So he wants the movie to stand alone. He wants to look at the footage, just the raw footage, and say, does the story make sense on its own terms? Without his brain filling in the gaps with C.S.
Exactly. In a vacuum, for a modern thriller or some original drama, that is a defensible editing technique. It ensures visual coherence. It makes sure the visual storytelling is doing all the work.
But this isn't a modern thriller.
No. And John Delarose, our source, argues that when you apply this technique to C.S. Lewis, it becomes a, quote, dereliction of duty.
Because Narnia isn't just a plot. It's not just kids go to Magic Land, fight witch, go home.
No, it's so much more. The source argues that Narnia is a pillar. It's a cultural giant. And Delarose argues that ignoring the text, this this willful ignorance, it leads to a loss of the story's essence.
The soul of it.
The soul. He points out that even Peter Jackson, when making Lord of the Rings, which I think most people would agree is a masterpiece of adaptation.
Absolutely. The gold standard.
He had to cut things for time. I mean, Tom Bombadil, The Scouring of the Shire, things got cut. But the implication from the source is that Jackson knew what he was cutting. He knew the weight of it.
Right. If you haven't read the book, you don't know if the scene you just cut was the thematic anchor of the entire story or just a description of a meal. You're flying blind through you might cut a pillar thinking it's just a decoration.
That is the fear. That is exactly the fear. And Weisblum goes further in the interview, which is what really gets Del Arroz going. He states that no material, not even the script itself, is sacrosanct.
Oh, boy.
He believes an editor must listen to the movie, listen to the footage, listen to the performances, and be open to rewrites based on what the actors are doing on the day.
And that word sacrosanct has to trigger a huge reaction from our source.
Right.
Because for many, many people, C.S. Lewis's work is sacrosanct. Not just literarily, but, almost spiritually.
Del Arroz is very, very clear on this. He says, and I'm quoting, "You shouldn't be open to rewrites and rechanges with C.S. Absolutely not." He views this approach as not just a difference in artistic style, but as a deep insult.
An insult to Lewis.
An insult to the work, to the legacy. He calls it offensive and suggests that this kind of approach should frankly be illegal when it comes to Tolkien or Lewis, which is, obviously hyperbole, but it shows his passion.
But I get the sentiment. It's the idea that these authors built something perfect, something complete, and Hollywood's job is just to translate it, not to fix it. It feels like, arrogance, doesn't it? To say, I don't need to read Lewis to improve Lewis.
It certainly reads as arrogance to the fan base. And this leads us to the broader anxiety here. If the editor isn't looking at the book, if the guy responsible for the final cut is operating on vibes and footage alone, who is ensuring that the soul of Narnia remains?
Right. Who's the guardian?
Because according to the source, the executives and producers are signaling that they want to change that soul quite a bit.
Which brings us right to section 2, the corporate vision. Because if the editor's saying, I'm ignoring the book, the suits are saying, and I can't believe I'm about to say this is not your grandmother's Narnia.
That is a direct quote from the source material, attributed to IMAX CEO Rich Gelfond.
Not your grandmother's Narnia. Ugh, I hate that phrase. It's always used to sell me something I didn't ask for. It feels like a bad car commercial from the 90s.
It does.
What does he actually mean by that in this?
Well, let's look at the context the source provides. Gelfond made these comments during an Investor Day presentation.
So he's talking to money.
Exactly. He's trying to hype up the film to investors who want to hear that this property has leg, that it's going to capture the youth demographic. He says this is a signal that it's going to be fresh, modern, exciting. But for a purist like Del Arroz, that phrase signals a deliberate departure from tradition.
It sounds like they are ashamed of the old Narnia. Like they're saying, don't worry, cool kids, this isn't that dusty old book your grandma likes. This one is Ed.
It certainly comes across that way to the fan base. It implies that grandmother's Narnia, the original text, is somehow deficient or boring or not good enough for today.
Which is just, it's insulting to the millions of people who love it exactly as.
And it's not just the IMAX CEO. The source also quotes producer Amy Pascal. She described the film as a very new take.
And she used a specific phrase, didn't she? A phrase that made me laugh out loud when I saw it in the notes.
She did. She said it's all about rock and roll.
Rock and roll. In Narnia. Are we talking about Mr. Tumnus shredding on an electric guitar? Is the White Witch starting a punk band called The Eternal Winter? What does that even mean?
Chuckles. The source doesn't give us the set list, thankfully, but the vibe Amy Pascal is describing is one of edginess, of rebellion. Rock and roll usually implies rebellion, loudness, a break from the classical, a break from the establishment.
Okay, so when you think of C.S. Lewis and Oxford Dawn, a man steeped in medieval literature and Christian theology, do you think of rock and roll?
I think of tweed jackets, pipes, Anglican theology, and long walks in the English countryside. I definitely do not think of rock and roll.
Right. Rock and roll is about smashing the system. Narnia is about restoring the rightful king. They are fundamentally opposite energies. It makes no sense.
And that is the disconnect the sources highlight. It suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of the tongue, of the entire project's ethos. Then you have Jonathan Fisher, an executive VP at the studio, calling it a bold reimagining.
Bold. That's another one of those Hollywood buzzwords.
Yeah.
It's right up there with subversive and gritty.
And Del Arroz has a very specific interpretation of the word bold. He says whenever Hollywood calls something bold, you know it's, quote, really bad.
Chuckle. He doesn't mince words.
No. In his view, bold is just code for destructive to the lore. It means they are changing something fundamental that didn't need changing, usually to make a political point or to chase a trend.
It all feels like there's a push for a singular vision. That's the phrase Netflix used, right, in their press.
Yes, that's it. In a blog post, Netflix described the film as Greta Gerwig's singular vision. And they praised her, of course, for finding fresh, original ways to tell stories, citing her massive success with Barbie.
But Barbie is a doll. There's no canon scripture for Barbie. You can do whatever you want. You can make Barbie an astronaut, a vet, or an existential philosopher having a crisis. Narnia is, well, it has rules, it has a map, it has a theology.
That is precisely the source's concern.
What?
Delaros argues that by emphasizing Gerwig's singular vision, the production is making it all her and not Lewis.
It's Gerwig's Narnia, not Lewis.
Exactly. The fear is that the author's voice, the thing that actually made the books popular for 70-plus years, is being drowned out by the director's megaphone. It becomes an auteur piece rather than a faithful adaptation.
So it's a battle of authorship? Is it C.S. Lewis's Narnia, or is it Greta Gerwig's Narnia featuring characters?
Source material, all the marketing and the quotes, suggest the latter is winning. They're selling the director, not the story.
So we have an editor ignoring the text, executives promising rock and roll, and a director with a singular vision. Let's get into the specific. What does this actually look like on? What are the rumors? Let's get into section.
Right. Let's go back to that IMAX CEO, Rich Gelf, because he didn't just say, not your grandmother's Narnia. He commented specifically on the music again. He said the music will be unbelievably contemporary.
Unbelievably contemporary. In a high fantasy setting, that usually means, what, pop song? Licensed music.
Well, the source mentions that in the context of these discussions, how this would be a big draw for IMAX, there have been references to bands like Pink Floyd and The Doors.
Pink Floyd in Narnia. Are we getting Dark Side of the Moon while they're walking to the stone table? Is Riders on the Storm playing during the thaw?
Now, to be clear, the source is reporting on the comparison, the kind of music or the vibe that people go to see in these big IMAX theaters. But the implication is clear.
The implication is we're not getting a sweeping classical orchestral score like Howard.
Not at all. We're getting something modern, something that sounds like 2026 or maybe 1975, but definitely not like a timeless 1940s fantasy.
That changes the entire atmosphere of the film. I mean, part of the magic of Narnia is that it's timeless, it's mythic. It's supposed to feel like a fairy tale that existed forever. If you put Break On Through to the other side, playing while they walk through the wardrobe, it dates it immediately.
It shatters the illusion.
Completely. It pulls you out of the secondary world and puts you right back in a movie theater.
It grounds it in our time rather than in fantasy time. And for the source, this is just more evidence of the rock and roll attitude clashing with the source material. It breaks the spell. But there is a bigger rumor, one that the source calls a potential disaster.
Okay, this is the one, the cast. I've seen this floating around online and people are, well, they're losing.
Yes, the source cites a report from a site called Nexus Point News. The report claims that Meryl Streep is in talk to play a central character.
Okay, Meryl Streep is a legend, an absolute icon. Usually that's fantastic news for a film. You get Meryl, you basically get an Oscar nomination.
Usually.
Yeah.
But the specific rumor, the claim, is that she might be playing, or rather voicing, a sex-swapped Aslan.
Whoa, Aslan, the lion, the son of the emperor beyond the sea.
The lion, the very same.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I can hear some people asking, why does it matter if a lion is a boy or a girl? It's a talking cat. But Aslan isn't just a lion.
In the books, Aslan is a very, very clear allegory for Christ.
It's the whole point of the series.
It is the theological heart of the book. And traditionally, Aslan is male, the son of the emperor beyond the sea. He is the king of beasts. He is the lion, not the lion.
So if you change Aslan's gender, what does that do to
the source argues you are fundamentally altering the theology and the lore. You're severing the allegory. Delaros calls this a bastardization. He says it would be an absolute disaster. It's not just about biology or who's doing the voice. It's about the specific Christian archetype Lewis was intentionally and very carefully invoked.
I can see why that hits such a nerve. It's not just about, can a woman voice a lion? Of course she can. It's about, are you changing the religious symbolism that C.S. Lewis intentionally wrote into the very fabric of the story?
That's the question.
If Aslan is a stand-in for Christ, and Christ in Christian theology was male, changing Aslan changes the entire meaning of the allegory.
Exactly. And for Delaros, this rumor, and we should stress it's just a rumor at this point.
Sure.
Whether it turns out to be true or not, it's indicative of the studio's mindset.
Yeah.
It suggests that nothing is off limits. Not the music, not the tone, not even the Cryan figure of the story. It suggests they view the characters as IP to be remixed rather than symbols to be respected.
It fits the pattern, doesn't it? Bold, reimagined, fresh take, not your grandmother's Narnia. A female Aslan would certainly be all of those things. It would definitely be.
It absolutely would. And despite the source mentioning the massive scale of the production, filmed at the largest soundstage in Europe, Hundreds of people, multiple locations. The fear is that all this visual spectacle is just a shiny wrapper on a hollowed-out story.
They have the budget, but do they believe in the story they're telling?
That is the perfect segue into Section 4, the cultural and theological battleground. Because for the source, this isn't just about a movie being bad. This is a cultural war. This is about who gets to tell stories and what stories are allowed to be told.
And De La Rose brings up this idea of the target audience. This is something I think a lot of big franchises are struggling with right now. Who are you actually making for?
Right. Remember Weisblum, the editor?
Yeah.
He said he wanted the film to work for people who love the book or people who don't.
Which, on the surface, sounds inclusive. It sounds like good business sense. You want everyone in the world to buy a ticket.
But the source argues it's actually a destructive mindset. He compares it to what he sees happening with Star Trek and the upcoming Starfleet Academy show. He says producers always claim their new thing is a love letter to fans, while simultaneously designing it for people who have never seen the property, or even for people who actively dislike the old property.
And De La Rose's argument is that you can't do both. You can't have it both.
He says, and I'm paraphrasing, you can't make things for both at the exact same. It's impossible. His argument is that when you try to please everyone, you end up diluting the thing that made the original fans love it in the first. You end up with a lukewarm, generic product that pleases no one.
It's the new Coke problem. You change the formula to try and get new drinkers, but you just alienate the millions of people who kept you in business years.
And De La Rose takes a step further. He accuses the studios of using identity politics to try and bring in these new audience. He believes they assume the brand name, Narnia, Star Trek, whatever, is strong enough to hook the legacy fans regardless of what they put on screen.
So they think the Christians will show up because it's Narnia, so let's make the movie for the cool, secular kids who think the old books are problematic. They take the loyal fans for granted.
That's his view. But De La Rose argues that this ignores the specific, unique nature of Narnia. He reminds us again and again that Narnia is an overtly Christian work.
You can't really miss it in the books. I mean, it's not subtle. The stone table, the resurrection, it's all there.
You absolutely can't. But the source makes a very harsh accusation. He claims that modern Hollywood creatives, quote, hate Christians.
That is a very strong statement.
It is. He says that if C.S. Lewis were alive today, these producers would not like him. They wouldn't want to have dinner with him. They would see him as part of the problem. And because of that ideological divide, he believes the modern audience spin is actually a cover.
Cover for what?
A cover for removing or subverting the Christian mythology that is central to the book. He believes they are determined to take away this great Christian mythology because they dislike the worldview it represents.
So they want the aesthetic of Narnia, the magic, the fawns, the talking animals, but without the morality, without the theology that underpins it all.
That's his argument, that in his view, it's not just incompetence or a different artistic vision. It's almost malicious. It's an intentional deconstruction of a Christian classic to make it palatable to a secular Hollywood culture.
Wow.
And that's why he refers to the producers as slot merchants, creating nonsense. He contrasts this with what he calls good, wholesome stuff, referencing the classic Narnia books and, interestingly, his own work.
Right. He mentions his own book, The Adventures of Baron von Model.
He does. And he uses it to make a point about tone and appeal. He says his work, like classic Narnia and The Hobbit, is fun for kids, fun for adults. He argues that this universal appeal, where you don't have to deconstruct the hero or inject modern politics or feel cynical about everything, is what Hollywood has lost.
He's saying, we used to know how to do this. We used to know how to tell stories about good and evil without winking at the camera and telling the audience that good and evil aren't real.
Exactly. It's that nostalgia again, that feeling that things used to be simple and good, and now everything has to be bold and rock and roll and complex and deconstructed.
And that feeling of loss, that feeling of seeing something you love being taken away and changed, that leads to Section 5, Vanward. Because De La Rose isn't just analyzing, he's mobile.
He talks about a boycott.
A direct call to action.
He references another commentator, Jack Posobiec, who called for people to write to the estate.
And the estate controls the rights, right?
Okay.
So the idea is, hey, you are the guardians of the flame. Stop this before it happens.
Exactly. The strategy is to apply pressure, to threaten to unsubscribe from Netflix, to tell them in no uncertain terms, if you botch this, we are gone. The goal is to make it financially painful for them to ignore the core audience.
It's voting with your wallet, the only language some of these companies understand.
But there is also a real admission of helplessness in the source material. It's not all confident calls to action. De La Rose says straight up, I don't know how to stop it. He feels that the machine is too big, that the culture has shifted too far, and that they are determined to ruin it no matter what fans say. He notes that Netflix has already sunk hundreds of millions of dollars into this. They aren't going to pull the plug because of a few angry emails.
That's kind of depressing, the idea that they're going to ruin it and we can't stop them.
Well, he does offer an alternative. It's not all doom and gloom. He pivots to the idea of independent media. He says if Hollywood can't do it anymore, if they're incapable of making good, wholesome stuff, then independent authors have to make something better.
So don't just mourn the death of Narnia. Go build a new one. Create an alternative.
Precise. He sees a vacuum being.
Huh.
If the pillars are being knocked down by slop merchants, the new pillars need to be built by independent creators. He sees this not just as a failure of Hollywood, but as a massive opportunity for indie creators to reclaim that story.
So where does this leave us? We've got a beloved series, a visionary director, an editor who is actively ignoring the book, and a fan base that is, let's say, bracing for impact.
It leaves us with a very, very tense standoff between the past and the present, between fidelity and reimagining.
Let's try to summarize this whole conflict. The core of the issue, it really seems to be the philosophy of adaptation itself. What is the goal?
Right. On one side, you have Andrew Weisblum and the production team. Their priority is the film. They want a movie that works visually, pacing-wise, and for a modern audience that may have never read the books.
And to do that, they're willing to make changes.
Big one. They're willing to ignore the source tech to maintain objectivity and inject contemporary elements like rock music or potential gender swaps to make it feel fresh. They see the source material as raw or to be refined into something new.
And on the other side, you have John De La Rose and the purists. Their priority is the text.
The text is everything. They believe the story is already perfect. They believe the author's intent, especially the theological intent, is supreme and must be honored. To them, bold reimagining is just a fancy word for vandalism.
They see the source material as a finished statue to be polished, not remodeled with a sledgehammer.
A perfect analogy. And it brings up a bigger picture question, doesn't it? One that goes way beyond Narnia. Is it actually possible to have a bold reimagining that also respects the source? Or are those two concepts at their core mutually exclusive?
That is the million-dollar question. Can you serve two masters? Can you serve the modern audience who wants rock and roll and surprises, and the legacy fan who wants fidelity to the text they grew up with?
The history of adaptations suggests it is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And usually when you try to sit on two chairs at once, you just end up falling on the floor. But
And looking at the evidence provided by the source, the quotes from the editor, the CEOs, the rumors about music and Aslan, it seems like this production has clearly chosen which master to serve.
it does.
And it's not the one who wrote.
No, doesn't seem to be. It seems they are betting on the new audience and just hoping the brand recognition keeps the old audience in the seat. And that brings us to a provocative final thought for you to chew on. If the editor is listening to the footage rather than the book, and the footage is missing the theology of C.S. Lewis because the script downplayed,
Right.
and the director is chasing a singular vision that is, quote, all her, who is left in the room to notice that the story has lost its soul.
That is a haunting question. If everyone in the editing bay is looking forward at the monitors, who is looking back at the library?
Exactly. And once that soul is gone, no amount of CGI, no contemporary soundtrack, no A-list celebrity voice, nothing can bring it back.
Well, on that cheerful note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Whether you are now excited for a rock and roll Narnia or you are already drafting your letter to the Lewis estate, we hope this gave you a much clearer picture of what is happening behind the scenes.
Stay skeptical. Stay curious.
And keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.